kick off the panel discussion, I'll just give you a little overview as to why we set up this panel and of who our panelists are. So we're all aware by now that the advertising and publishing space is getting hugely disrupted. As the media landscape gets more fragmented, it's harder for brands to reach their audiences, and it's key for publishers to work out new ways to monetize their content. So with that in mind, we thought we'd put this panel together to show you how brands and publishers are working with young, early-stage tech companies to solve some of these problems. So before we do anything else, Prash, I think you should tell us all about what Rezonence is about and what the product is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Rezonence, we are an ad tech company. Our main product is the free wall. What it is really monetization strategy for publishers that treads the sort of middle part between giving your content away for free and putting up a paywall. The way it works is really what we do is we take content and we put part of it behind an ad. The user can unlock that content by answering a very simple question, a sort of one-click basically bit of engagement that unlocks that content. Why this is great is because the advertiser gets sort of a proven brand engagement, and at the same time this allows the publisher therefore to monetize their content. So that's sort of free wall and our product in a very simple sense. I don't know if you saw the image up there, but that was basically the free wall in action.
So Joe, what are the two sort of main challenges that are in your immediate focus currently with your e-commerce department, and how does Rezonence go and sort of to look to solve those kind of problems?
So I think within this field, there's kind of two key things that we're looking for, especially with the kind of vast amount of brands and advertising that we have. And the first one is all about cut through. So how do we actually make sure that within all the noise that is the banners, etc., that you see online, do we actually make sure that people notice what's there? And Jason, before we had to leave, was just saying, I think the chances are you're more likely to be in the SAS than you are to click on a banner ad. And yet we still spend thousands of pounds on them every year, like every other company. So one of the key things is how do we actually make sure that not only do people see it, but then moves on into how do we make sure they get that recall in there? So how do I make sure that after somebody's seen an ad, that puts the product into their consideration? As we heard earlier on, the kind of old model was you saw a TV ad, you remember that product when you're in store, and it might then impact what you go on to purchase. Online, they could go on and purchase it straight away, which would be great. Or, again, if we get that recall right, they remember that product, and then that goes into that kind of mind shift in the same way that TV would.
Great. And I know that you are regularly exposed and introduced to new technologies and new startups. How do you distinguish the fads from the game changers?
With a lot of difficulty, actually. So I get 10, 20 emails a day from companies saying, try this, it's great. And you know what? I probably miss quite a lot of stuff that is great. I think I look at it in a number of different ways. So the first one is, I think about, is this something that me or anybody else in kind of my family or friends would use? I think as a kind of good benchmark, as an average consumer of FMCG products, is it something that I could consider somebody using? The second one, and that's kind of the common sense test for me. The second one is then, is it based on shopper or consumer insight? So have they thought about a problem that a consumer or a shopper has when they're going about doing their shopping, doing their kind of everyday life? Does it address something? And then the third one is a principle that I use to decide upon starting any pilot, which is it the first company that I've seen that's doing something in this space? Is it the best company that's doing it? Or is it completely unique? They're the kind of three criteria that I then look at. So it's first, best, and unique as being key considerations that I use for picking. But do you know what? I think a lot of it comes with experience. I've been lucky enough to meet some great companies, some amazing startups, and some really talented people like the guys at Rezonence. And do you know what? Sometimes it comes down to a bit of a gut feel. This feels like it's the right thing to do. And I've got an awesome team who I work with who can help me with that decision.
Great. Prash. So first, best, and unique is what they're looking for, and they're using you, so that can only be a good thing.
Well, I'd like to think that we were first, best, and unique.
So can you tell us a little bit, I mean, your background is in banking.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea with free wall, why sort of the ad tech space was the area that you've ended up in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I was a banker 13 years as a quant analyst, but I was part of a research team. And one of the questions that a lot of the analysts would sort of raise was like, why is our publishers struggling so much? What, the challenges that we're facing? And during the sort of course of various discussions, research, we realized that, well, most of them couldn't really put up a paywall. They would just lose too much of their audience. So they had to try and monetize using alternative methods. Seems like micropayments and things like that were out of the sort of question. So it had to be ad funded. But as Joe already said, most ads are simply ignored. So effectively creating a low value proposition for the advertisers. Therefore, they weren't generating enough revenue. So effectively the question there for the problem to solve was how can you make ads sort of much more engaging or basically increase their recall level. And in a sense, one of the, if you think of advertising as education, then how are you educated? I mean, the world's education system is based on effectively what you call active recall. So just making a statement to someone is not enough. You generally get them to repeat it back to you. So that's why teachers say, now repeat back to me, or that's why you get homework. So the question and answer aspect of it that's how that came about to be. It was like, we'll show you an advert, and now we're going to test you on it. Effectively, have you do your homework and tell me what you just saw. And that original little idea was the genesis of the product. Because I was in banking and doing this sort of research, I knew how big the problem was and effectively what the potential is if you could solve it for a business. Yeah, it seemed crazy at the time. Maybe some people still think it's crazy, but I thought as a banker, well, that was a good trade. Like I sold my banking career and I bought myself an ad tech career effectively. Hopefully we'll find out if it was a good trade or not. But that's the genesis really, that's the story.
Great. And so Joe sort of told us how he spots the game changers. I mean, why would you say Rezonence is the one to watch?
Well, I mean, we've been very bold to start off with. I mean, we are doing something that everyone else, initially thought, like, this is crazy. There's no way you can hide content and get someone to do something for the content. That's just crazy. But when you go and speak to publishers and the advertisers and say, look, this is a value exchange proposition at its core. It's about getting the value exchange right between the advertiser, the publisher, and the audience. You do that and you can have a transaction, right? There's some articles out there that you can't charge. You just have to give it away for free and hope to make whatever you can around the edges. There's some articles perhaps you can actually get someone to pay for. But I think a lot of articles, if you will, a lot of content will fall into that in-between area where actually, say, pay with your engagement. I need 1 second of your time, not a 30-second video some people try. This is of a 1 second, 1 click level of engagement, and you get this premium content for free. And I think that's the boldness in sort of effectively sort of saying this is what you have to do to get this whole industry to sort of work is I think what we fundamentally did as a business, and that's why I think we'll succeed.
Good. And Joe, I know you're working with Rezonence, but they're not the only startup that you're working with. Unilever has a number of initiatives, including things like the Foundry, which is their sort of BBC Labs alternative program, and the stuff you've been doing in your departments, like your hackathons. You're working with startups all the time. Why is it so important that Unilever does engage with startups and work with startups? And what does success look like to you when you are working with a startup? Is it results, or is it just installing that nature of trialing and testing and innovating quickly?
So I'll start with kind of how my team sits in Unilever. I feel like I'm in quite a privileged and fairly unique space in Unilever in that my budget's set out to test and learn. So whereas a lot of our brand managers, their budgets are very much, you need to be spending this to deliver this amount of sales, there's no kind of appetite for risk there because they've got a number they need to hit, so they don't want to spend money where they're not sure what that result will be. Whereas my budget's quite the opposite. It's deliberately to go out there and find something that's new or that's different. Which I find really kind of empowering to be able to go out. The second one is, it's kind of my passion. I really like going out and meeting with other businesses. I like hearing about new ideas. I'd love to come up with a great idea myself. It hasn't happened yet. But going out and seeing the kind of up and coming talent that's there, I've got a really firm belief that we're not going to get that groundbreaking innovation sitting in kind of corporate ivory towers as we do, because you're sitting at a desk. That isn't the place for creativity, and actually most of the best ideas are the ones that are out there that we can go and speak to other people on. The other piece is why startups versus kind of some of our bigger and more established agencies. One reason for that is I often meet a startup and then find that we've worked with them before, but we've worked with them through a bigger agency, and surprisingly enough, we've paid about 3 or 4 times as much as we needed to for that piece of work. The second one is, if it's already with a big agency kind of being touted by them to their clients, we've kind of missed the boat on it. We're not going to be the first ones in, so I try and make sure I get as much time and space as I can, just understanding what's out there. So, the work that we do with Hannah in understanding what talent's coming through the BBC, the hackathons that we do. The reasons for that is, I say I get a lot of emails coming through saying, here's a product we've got. We kind of throw that on its head a bit for the hackathon, where we say, rather than come and tell us what problems you've got, what solutions you've got, we're going to tell you the problems we have. And actually, we'll commission work with you if you can solve these problems. So that's a really good way of getting startups and maybe people that haven't kind of got their break at that point to come in and say, here's a real business problem. And do you know what? If Unilever's facing it, chances are Procter & Gamble, Nestle, or any of our competitors are also facing that problem. They can then work on something that they know will be relevant for us. And do you know what? They're great fun. The last hackathon we did was probably my 2 favourite days ever at Unilever. So, and I know from the feedback we got, the energy was really high and people had a really good time.
Great, and I mean, I was there. It was a great couple of days. It was really impressive. And so Unilever was obviously doing great stuff in this space, and kind of pilots and tests can get turned around quite quickly. But I know that one of our challenges when we bring companies into the BBC is trying to quickly do things and trying to find the right person that can sign things off and be a real champion for innovation in the business. I know, Prash, from kind of being next to you day to day, that's a struggle that you see often. So Joe, what would be your advice to sort of young startup companies about how they find that right person in the business to sell their product to, so they can get things going quickly?
Well, the first one is obviously come and speak to me and my team so we can be first. Outside of that, it's a really difficult one because I've got friends that work in similar companies to Unilever, and then there's not always the same equivalent. Every company is structured differently. The kind of bits of advice I would always give is, make sure when you're going with a proposition, you've got some insight behind it. So actually the worst kind of pitches I get are ones where it's just like, here's the product, it'll make you money, go. I want to be taken on the journey of what brought you to that. Prash has got a really good example of where he essentially took the product to his family and friends first, and said to them, what do you think of the product? I think ended up having to give out more Amazon vouchers than he wanted. If you want to understand how that happened, grab him in the break. But people come, even the smallest bit of qual is useful to say, do you know what, somebody like you could use this. I think the second piece is you need to go in low. So David before said, actually, you need to put a big chunk of money behind doing pilots if you want to take it seriously. I'd probably disagree with that a bit more. I think you need to pilot small and scale. The purpose of my team is that we pilot small, we prove that model, and then we scale it up. Obviously, the money needs to be efficient to actually make sure you can get some results from it. There's no point advertising to 5 people and basing the results on that. But actually start small, because the people you're likely to be speaking to in other companies, the budget you're asking for is money that they could safely put somewhere else, whereas it's always going to feel like a risk putting it in a different proposition.
Okay, and Prash, I'm going to kind of turn that question around to you and say, you're working with BBC, Unilever, Northern Shell, a number of other big organisations. I mean, what has been your main stumbling block? And there's some big organisations out here. What would your advice be to them for perhaps how they can change a little bit so that they can get technologies through quickly?
Yeah, I mean, starting off with, I think what Joe said, what is key is to try and find the right person. Now that is a much easier said than done. Finding the right person is actually probably one of the very first stumbling blocks. So, you speak to someone and they go, right, now that, yes, I am someone in sales, or I am director, but that I couldn't do that, and you have to speak to someone else and someone else. So it takes a little while to find that right person. And then, but once you found that right person, in most big organizations, generally, it's not a decision that one person can make. I mean, with Unilever and Northern Shell, we were very, very fortunate, actually, that Joe basically could do what, he's he wanted within his sort of remit. And Northern Shell, fortunately, we met pretty much the whole management team on day one. It was very fortunate there. But I mean, it's unfortunately, it feels like there is no sort of wand or there's sort of fixed methodology that you just go in and say, well, this is the process. You can just replicate it across every organization. You sort of have to learn the organization. You have to learn their culture. You have to know what works. Something that works here is not going to work there, right? And I think a lot of it's almost you have to be prepared and you have to have an open mind. As Joe said, all these people generally have better things to do and have safe ways to be getting on with their jobs, and sort of working with an unknown startup has risks. There's upside as well, but definitely has risks. And you've got to try and slowly change that balance, if you will, where they're thinking, actually, there's more upside to me here. Yeah, and time, actually. From our sense, like, we joke about it, and other startups, we say, oh, look, we all work in startup time, where like 1 day is a very long period of time. For big organizations, a quarter is a fairly small period of time. And so it's not really a stumbling block, it just feels like a very big stumbling block. You're saying, this is taking forever, and then in the end, I think, from our point of view, getting this trial through Mindshare seemed like to take forever, and I think you said it was the fastest you'd ever done a trial. So that's.
And you touched on Mindshare, Joe. I mean, we're kind of missing out the sort of media agencies. I mean, what role do they play in this picture? I mean, do you want them coming to you and presenting you with these innovations?
Yes, I mean, my focus is around e-commerce, and actually, it's not a box. I don't think digital marketing and e-commerce pretty much merge, as we saw on that shopper journey from earlier. There's no kind of one point where you suddenly become a shopper, and before that you were just consuming advertising. So I kind of step as much as I can outside of just being e-commerce. And we've got a really good, my team meet monthly with Mindshare, so they essentially do the same thing. We have meetings together, we talk about the agencies and the opportunities that we've seen, and then together work it through. I think Mindshare work with Unilever on a global scale. They do our buying of media, but they also take advice from us if we say we want to go with this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And I think we're coming towards the end of our time. So to wrap up, Joe, perhaps one piece of advice to the big organisations out there about how they can drive innovation through, and Prash, one piece of advice to the sort of smaller startup companies about how they can get things going with the big businesses. Joe?
Yeah, so I think to big organisations, it's get a single person that can sign stuff off like this. I know from having worked in other parts of our business that sometimes you can have to go through 3 or 4 people or a whole committee to get something signed off. My team are empowered to make that decision so we can act fast. And I think unless you've got a structure like that in place, it's going to feel like you're moving, the ship to turn, as opposed to just being able to kind of change course at the kind of flip of a hat.
Yeah, I mean, my piece of advice, I guess, the other way around is sort of say, go when you pitch to a big organization, try and understand the organization and especially the environment that the person you're sort of pitching to effectively is operating in, and try and make your proposition seem as much like as it's part of what they not normally do. So it's not really, a risky proposition, or they're not doing something completely wild. It's actually, what, you pretty much do this every day, just, carry on doing it. I mean, so you've got to, it's a little bit of an art, I guess. I can't say I've, we've solved that problem for us, but I'd say that's how we need to go about it.
Excellent, good stuff. Well, I hope this has been an interesting panel. Prash, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Anna.